The sun-bleached horizon of Whisper Creek trembled with the heat of summer 1878 as Cassidy Jameson stood on the dusty edge of town, her fingers clutching a crumpled letter that had traveled 2,000 miles to deliver its crushing news. Her family homestead in Missouri was gone, foreclosed and sold, while she'd been out west trying to forge a new life as a schoolteacher. A tumbleweed skittered across her path like a nervous messenger, matching her aimless wanderings since she'd been informed that the teaching position she'd traveled so far to claim had been given to a local man instead. 3 weeks of savings remained in her reticule, not enough for a ticket home, even if there had been a home to return to. Cassidy's chestnut hair, once neatly pinned, now fell in loose strands around her face as she walked with no destination in mind. Whisper Creek, Wyoming territory, had seemed like Providence when she'd found the advertisement seeking a teacher. Now it felt like just another broken promise. "Miss, you're walking mighty close to Rattler's Bend," called a deep voice behind her. Cassidy turned to find a tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. As he approached, she could make out a weather-worn face beneath the brim of a dust-coated Stetson. He couldn't have been more than 30, but the lines around his eyes suggested he'd seen his share of hardship. "I wasn't aware I needed permission to walk on open land," she replied, her voice more brittle than she'd intended. The man dismounted in one fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. "No, madam, you don't. But most folks avoid this stretch on account of the rattlesnakes that sun themselves on those rocks just ahead." He gestured toward a collection of flat stones she hadn't noticed. Cassidy felt the blood drain from her face. She'd been so lost in her own misery, she hadn't given a thought to the dangers of her surroundings. "I'm Cole Armstrong," he said, extending a calloused hand. Cassidy hesitated before accepting the handshake. "Cassidy Jameson, you're the schoolteacher from back east," he stated rather than asked. In a town the size of Whisper Creek, news traveled faster than the daily stagecoach. "I was to be," she corrected, blinking back sudden tears. It seems Mr. Hollister's nephew needed employment more than Whisper Creek needed a qualified teacher. Cole's expression darkened. "Henry Hollister's about as crooked as a dog's hind leg. Town council doesn't know half of what he does." The evening wind picked up, sending a chill through Cassidy despite the lingering heat. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how alone she was in this unforgiving landscape. "Let me walk you back to town," Cole offered, leading his horse by the reins. "No sense in standing out here watching the snakes wake up for their evening hunt." As they walked, Cassidy found herself unburdening her troubles to this stranger. Words flowed from her like water breaking through a dam. "My father died last year. Mother followed 3 months later. The bank took our home. I thought I could start fresh here, but—" She took a shuddering breath. "They said I can't bear life out here, that a woman alone would never survive the West." Cole stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Then you'll bear mine instead." The words hung in the air between them, neither declaration nor question, but something in between. "Mr. Armstrong, we've only just met. I couldn't possibly—" "I'm not proposing marriage, Miss Jameson," he clarified, though something in his eyes suggested the thought wasn't entirely unwelcome. "I'm offering you work. My ranch hands quit last week after a dispute with neighboring cattlemen. I need help, and you need a purpose." The practicality of his offer knocked the wind from her indignation. "What could I possibly do on a ranch? I know literature and arithmetic, not cattle and crops." "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you mend clothes?" "Of course." "Can you read and write correspondence?" "Better than most." A smile creased his sun-weathered face. "Then you're already more useful than half the cowhands in the territory. I'll pay you fair wages, provide a cabin of your own, and when you've saved enough to move on, I won't stand in your way." Something about his straightforward manner made Cassidy believe him. What choice did she have? Return east in defeat? Beg for charity from strangers? Pride stiffened her spine. "I accept your offer, Mr. Armstrong, provided the cabin has a proper lock and your men understand I'm to be treated with respect." Cole nodded, his expression serious. "You have my word." The Armstrong Ranch lay 7 miles outside of Whisper Creek, a modest spread compared to some, but well-maintained. A 2-story main house stood surrounded by several outbuildings, a corral, and a small bunkhouse. Set apart from the rest was a snug cabin that Cole explained had belonged to his mother before she passed. "It's been empty for 2 years now," he said as he opened the door. "Might need some airing out." The cabin was simple but sound, one room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding books that suggested Cole's mother had been a woman of some education. "I'll have fresh linen sent over, and there's a wash house behind the main house you're welcome to use," Cole explained. "Meals for the hands are at sunrise and sunset. I take breakfast at 6 and supper at 7, though that might change with roundup coming." Cassidy nodded, already mentally organizing how she would make this small space her own. "When do I begin?" "Tomorrow's soon enough. Get settled tonight." True to his word, Cole sent over linens, a small basket of provisions, and to Cassidy's surprise a stack of ledgers with a note explaining they needed organizing. The work proved to be her salvation in those early days. Cole's ranch books were in disarray, clearly maintained by someone with more experience with cattle than columns. Cassidy found comfort in bringing order to chaos, even as she learned to cook for hungry ranch hands and mend tears in work shirts. The men, initially wary of her presence, gradually came to accept her as part of the ranch's rhythm. There was Eli, the grizzled foreman who'd ridden with Cole's father, young Tomas, barely 18 but skilled with horses, and the Wilson brothers, Seth and Samuel, quiet men who did their work without complaint. Cole himself remained something of a mystery. He worked alongside his men from dawn until dusk, joining Cassidy only for the evening meal, during which they discussed ranch business or sometimes simply ate in companionable silence. She learned he'd inherited the ranch 5 years earlier when his father was thrown from a horse. His mother had succumbed to pneumonia 2 winters past. "Do you have other family?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the day's heat finally giving way to a cooler breeze. Cole shook his head. "None living." "You?" "A cousin in Philadelphia I haven't seen since childhood. For all practical purposes, I'm alone in the world." He nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Being alone and being lonely aren't always the same thing," he observed. "I've known men surrounded by family who were the loneliest souls I ever met." "And you? Are you lonely, Mr. Armstrong?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. In the lantern light, Cassidy thought she saw a flicker of vulnerability cross his features before he composed himself. "I have my land and my responsibilities. That's enough for most days." But not all days, Cassidy thought. Not the quiet evenings when the work was done, when the vastness of the land seemed to emphasize the smallness of a single life. 3 weeks passed in this manner, with Cassidy finding her place within the routine of the ranch. Her initial wariness gave way to a growing respect for the difficult but honest work of raising cattle, and for Cole, whose fairness and quiet determination earned the loyalty of his men. The change came with the first autumn storm. Dark clouds had been building all day, and by afternoon the air felt charged with expectation. Cole and the hands worked frantically to secure everything that could blow away and bring the more vulnerable livestock closer to the barn. Cassidy watched from the kitchen window as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The men were still out in the far pasture when the sky opened and rain came down in blinding sheets. Lightning cracked across the darkened sky, followed immediately by thunder that shook the windows. Hours passed with no sign of Cole or the others. Cassidy paced the floor, peering anxiously through the rain-lashed glass. When the door finally burst open, Cole staggered in, drenched to the bone, half carrying Tomas, whose face was pale beneath his tan. "He got thrown when lightning spooked his horse," Cole explained as they laid the young man on the kitchen table. "I think his arm's broken." Cassidy's education had included basic medical care, a necessity for a teacher in remote areas. She examined Tomas's arm, confirming Cole's assessment. "We need to set it before swelling makes it worse," she said, already gathering supplies. "Hold him steady." Cole gripped Tomas's shoulders while Cassidy manipulated the broken bones back into alignment. The young man bit down hard on the leather belt they'd placed between his teeth, his eyes squeezed shut against the pain. With quick, efficient movements, Cassidy splinted and bandaged the arm. "That was well done," Cole said later, after they'd moved Tomas to a bed in the main house. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from the coffee cups between them. "Where did you learn such skills?" "My father was a doctor," Cassidy replied. He believed his children should understand the fundamentals of medicine. My brother followed him into practice before the war took him. Cole studied her across the table, seeing her perhaps for the first time as more than a displaced schoolteacher. You're full of surprises, Miss Jameson. As are you, Mr. Armstrong. I didn't expect a rancher to have a library of classics in his study. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. My mother's influence. She taught at a girls' seminary in Boston before she married my father and followed him west. She made sure I was educated, even out here. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was. His voice softened with memory. She used to say that true strength isn't in weathering hardship alone, but in finding joy despite it. The storm raged on outside, but in the warm kitchen, something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits beneath their differences. The weeks following the storm brought changes to the ranch. With Tomas unable to work, Cassidy found herself taking on more responsibilities. She learned to ride beyond the basic skills she possessed, to help with simple tasks that didn't require a cowhand's expertise but needed doing nonetheless. Cole proved to be a patient teacher, never dismissing her questions or belittling her mistakes. The land doesn't care if you're a man or woman, he told her one afternoon as they rode the fence line checking for damage. It only cares if you respect its power and work with what it gives you. As autumn deepened toward winter, Cassidy discovered a growing affection for this life she'd never imagined for herself. The rhythm of days marked by sunrise and sunset rather than clocks, the satisfaction of work that produced tangible results, the simple pleasures of a meal shared after honest labor, all of it filled a void she hadn't recognized within herself. And then there was Cole. She caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, how his hands moved with gentle confidence, whether handling a skittish colt or repairing a bridle. His rare smiles, when they came, transformed his serious face into something that made her heart beat faster. For his part, Cole began finding reasons to seek her company beyond ranch business. He brought books from his library to her cabin, recommending favorites and asking her opinion. He took to having his evening coffee on her small porch, their conversations stretching longer as the nights grew colder. Why did you really hire me that day? Cassidy asked him one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge. You could have simply given me money for a stage ticket east. Cole was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice had a quality she hadn't heard before, a vulnerability beneath the strength. I recognized something in you, he said finally. A determination not to be defeated. My mother had that same look when she first came west, terrified but refusing to show it. He paused. And selfishly, I was tired of coming home to an empty house, speaking only of cattle prices and weather. Cassidy's heart beat a rapid rhythm against her ribs. And now, his eyes met hers, steady and clear. Now I find myself looking forward to the end of each day, knowing you'll be here. The confession hung in the crisp autumn air between them, neither rushing to fill the silence that followed. It was enough, for now, to have spoken truth and had it received without judgment. The first snow came early that year, a brief flurry that melted by noon but served as warning of the winter to come. The ranch shifted into preparation mode, stacking firewood, smoking meat, checking the integrity of all buildings against the coming cold. Whisper Creek held its annual harvest social the weekend before Thanksgiving, an event Cole explained was as much about practical matchmaking as celebration. Bachelors and widowers looking for wives before winter sets in, he said as he helped Cassidy into the wagon for the trip to town. And will you be among those looking? She asked lightly, though her stomach tightened at the thought. Cole gave her a sidelong glance. I think we both know I've already found what others are seeking. The social was held in the town hall, decorated with corn husks and pumpkins. A fiddler and banjo player provided music while the women of Whisper Creek had outdone themselves with pies, cakes, and savory dishes spread across trestle tables. Cassidy felt eyes on her as she entered alongside Cole. Her simple blue dress, mended carefully and adorned with a new collar she'd embroidered herself, was plain compared to the town women's finery, but Cole's appreciative glance when he'd first seen her had been enough to bolster her confidence. Miss Jameson, Henry Hollister approached, his smile not reaching his eyes. What a surprise to see you still in Whisper Creek. I had assumed you'd returned east. Mr. Hollister, Cassidy acknowledged with cool politeness. As you can see, I found employment more suited to my abilities. Hollister's gaze flicked to Cole, standing protectively at her side. Yes, I'd heard Armstrong had taken on help, though I wonder what your Eastern friends would think of your current position. Before Cassidy could respond, Cole stepped forward. Miss Jameson has brought efficiency and education to my ranch operations, Mr. Hollister. Perhaps if you valued such qualities, your own ventures wouldn't require so many creative solutions. The implication hung in the air. Rumors had circulated for months about Hollister's questionable business dealings. You do well to mind your own affairs, Armstrong, Hollister replied, voice low. Boundaries matter out here, as does knowing which side you stand on. Cole's expression hardened. I know exactly where I stand, Hollister. Do you? The tension between the men was broken by the fiddler calling for couples to take the floor for a Virginia reel. Cole turned to Cassidy with an offered hand. Shall we? Dancing with Cole felt like flying. He moved with the same easy grace he showed on horseback, guiding her through the steps with confidence. As they twirled among the other dancers, Cassidy caught glimpses of speculation on the faces around them. In a community where every interaction was noted and discussed, their relationship had clearly become a subject of interest. People are watching us, she murmured as the dance brought them together again. Let them, Cole replied, his hand warm at her waist. I'm not ashamed to be seen with the most intelligent woman in the territory. Later, as they shared a piece of apple pie at a small table in the corner, Whisper Creek's newspaper editor, Walter Jenkins, approached them. Cole, Miss Jameson, he greeted them with a tip of his hat. Finest harvest social in years, wouldn't you say? Indeed, Mr. Jenkins, Cassidy replied. The community has much to be proud of. Jenkins nodded, his expression turning serious. Speaking of community matters, Cole, there's talk of Hollister making a play for water rights along Red Creek. That would cut off your southern pastures, wouldn't it? Cole's jaw tightened. He's welcome to try. Those rights have been attached to Armstrong land since my father's time. Well, you might want to check your paperwork. Rumor has it some documents have gone missing from the county records office. Jenkins lowered his voice. Just thought you should know. After Jenkins left, Cole sat in troubled silence. Cassidy placed her hand over his on the table. What does this mean? It means Hollister is making his move, Cole replied grimly. He's been buying up smaller ranches for years. Mine is one of the few left standing in his way. But surely he can't simply take your water rights. Not legally. But out here, paper and law only matter if you can enforce them. He squeezed her hand. Don't worry. I've dealt with men like Hollister before. The ride home was quieter, both lost in thoughts about what Jenkins had revealed. As Cole helped Cassidy down from the wagon at her cabin, he hesitated, still holding her hand. Thank you for coming tonight, he said softly. Having you there. It matters to me. Impulsively, Cassidy rose on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek. It matters to me too, she whispered before slipping inside, heart racing at her own boldness. The next morning brought grim news. Eli rode in at dawn to report that someone had cut the fence along the southern boundary during the night and a portion of Cole's herd had scattered. Hollister's men? Cole asked, his voice tight with anger as they gathered in the yard. Eli nodded. Saw tracks leading back toward his property. Too many men for us to confront directly. We need to find the cattle before they wander too far, Cole decided. Everyone saddle up. We'll split into pairs to cover more ground. To Cassidy's surprise, Cole turned to her. I need you to ride with me. You know the books better than anyone which cattle are where, how many we should be looking for. The day that followed was grueling. They rode for hours, tracking scattered groups of cattle through ravines and brush. By sunset, they'd recovered most of the herd, but 24 prime steers remained missing. They're likely on Hollister land by now, Cole said grimly as they made their way back to the ranch, the recovered cattle being driven ahead by the other men. He'll claim they wandered over and charge me a fee to get them back, or simply rebrand them as his own. Cassidy had never seen him so disheartened. There must be something we can do. The law won't help. Sheriff Daniels owes his position to Hollister's influence. Cole ran a hand through his hair in frustration. This is just the beginning. Hollister wants my land, and he'll keep coming until he gets it. That night, unable to sleep, Cassidy lit a lamp and pulled out the ranch ledgers. There had to be some record or proof of ownership that could help Cole protect what was rightfully his. Hours passed as she combed through years of transactions, property deeds, and correspondence. Near dawn, she found it tucked between the pages of an old ledger, a faded map with notations in an elegant hand she recognized as belonging to Cole's mother. The map detailed water sources across the Armstrong Ranch and neighboring properties, with dates and signatures from territorial officials confirming water rights dating back 20 years. Cassidy hurried to the main house as the first light broke over the eastern hills. She found Cole in his study, slumped at his desk where he'd apparently spent the night reviewing similar documents. "I found something," she said breathlessly, spreading the map before him. "Your mother kept records, detailed ones. This map has official signatures predating any claim Hollister could make." Cole studied the document, hope gradually replacing the weariness in his eyes. This might be enough to force a legal hearing instead of letting Hollister settle things his way. He looked up at her with something like wonder. "How did you know where to look?" "Your mother organized the ledgers by season and type of transaction. I noticed she kept water-related matters separate, probably because she understood how vital they were." Without warning, Cole rose and pulled her into an embrace, his arms strong around her. "You are extraordinary, Cassidy Jameson," he murmured into her hair. She allowed herself to melt against him for a moment before reluctantly pulling back. "What do we do now?" "We take this to Judge Harmon in Cheyenne. He's one of the few officials Hollister hasn't bought. But first," Cole's expression hardened with resolve, "we're going to get my cattle back." The plan was simple but risky. Under cover of darkness, Cole, Eli, and the Wilson brothers would enter Hollister's property to locate and retrieve the stolen cattle. Cassidy and Tomas would remain at the Armstrong Ranch, prepared to cover their absence if anyone came looking. "If we're not back by dawn, take these documents to Marshall Weber in Pine Ridge," Cole instructed Cassidy, handing her a packet containing the water rights map and other papers. "He's a fair man, he'll make sure they reach Judge Harmon." Cassidy gripped his arm. "Be careful. Hollister strikes me as a man who wouldn't hesitate to claim self-defense if he caught you on his land." Cole covered her hand with his own. "I've no intention of giving him the chance." His voice softened. "I have too much to come back for." The hours after the men departed were the longest of Cassidy's life. She paced the floor of the main house, jumping at every sound. Tomas sat by the window, his splinted arm resting on the sill, peering into the darkness. "Mr. Cole knows what he's doing, Miss Cassidy," the young man assured her. "He grew up on this land, knows every rock and tree better than Hollister ever could." Near midnight, the sound of approaching riders sent them both into alert stillness. Tomas peered cautiously through the curtains. "It's not our men," he reported grimly. "Looks like Hollister himself with 3 others." Cassidy's mind raced. Hide the documents under the floorboard in Cole's study, the loose one by the bookcase. Then get to the back door. If they try to search the house, slip out and run for the Wilson place. "What about you, Miss Cassidy?" "I'll handle Hollister." Heart pounding, Cassidy smoothed her skirts and pinched color into her pale cheeks before opening the front door, oil lamp in hand, as Hollister and his men reached the porch. "Mr. Hollister, this is an unexpected hour for a social call," she greeted him with feigned calm. Hollister's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Miss Jameson, I'm looking for Armstrong. We have business to discuss." "I'm afraid Mr. Armstrong isn't available. He's gone to Cheyenne on urgent business, something about territorial water rights." The lie came easily, fueled by her determination to protect Cole. Hollister's expression flickered with uncertainty. "Cheyenne? When did he leave?" "This afternoon, directly after discovering some of his cattle had been rustled." Cassidy met his gaze steadily. He was quite determined to speak with Judge Harmon first thing in the morning. One of Hollister's men shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Boss, if he's gone to the territorial judge, shut up, Fletcher," Hollister snapped before turning back to Cassidy. "You expect me to believe Armstrong left his ranch unprotected with just you and that crippled boy to watch over it? Believe what you will, Mr. Hollister. The facts remain unchanged." Cassidy lifted her chin. "Now, unless you have legitimate business that I can assist with, I must ask you to leave. It's improper for a woman alone to entertain men at this hour." For a tense moment, Cassidy feared Hollister would call her bluff. Then he jerked his head toward his men. Check the barn and bunkhouse. I want to know if the hands are really gone. As two riders dismounted to follow his orders, Cassidy maintained her composed facade despite her racing heart. If they found evidence of the men's recent departure, her story would crumble. Minutes stretched like hours before the men returned. Horses are gone, boss. Bunkhouse is empty. Looks like they left in a hurry. Hollister's eyes narrowed as he studied Cassidy's face for any sign of deception. Finally, he turned his horse. Tell Armstrong when he returns that this isn't over. A man ought to be careful about the company he keeps, especially when that company might cost him everything he values. Only after the riders disappeared into the night did Cassidy allow her knees to buckle, sinking onto the porch steps with relief. Tomas emerged from his hiding place, the documents clutched in his good hand. That was brave, Miss Cassidy, he said, awe in his young voice. She shook her head. That was terrifying, and I fear we've only bought a little time. Dawn broke with no sign of Cole and the others. Cassidy had just decided to saddle a horse and head for Pine Ridge when hoofbeats in the yard sent her rushing to the door. Cole dismounted wearily, his clothes dusty and a streak of blood on his sleeve, but his eyes were bright with triumph. Behind him, Eli and the Wilsons guided the missing cattle into the home pasture. You did it, Cassidy breathed, running to meet him. Cole caught her in his arms, lifting her briefly off her feet. We did, but we need to move quickly. Hollister will discover they're gone by midday. As Cole cleaned up, Cassidy recounted Hollister's midnight visit. He'll be furious when he realizes I lied about you going to Cheyenne, she concluded. Then we'd better make it truth instead of fiction, Cole replied grimly. I'm taking these documents to Judge Harmon today. With proof of rustling on top of the water rights issue, we can finally bring Hollister's schemes into the open. We? Cassidy questioned. Cole took her hands in his. I need you with me, Cassidy. You understand these records better than I do, and your testimony about last night matters. He paused, something vulnerable entering his expression. And selfishly, I'm not ready to let you out of my sight after what you risked for my sake. The journey to Cheyenne took 2 days by wagon, traveling as fast as the roads would allow. They stayed at a respectable boarding house, Cassidy in a small room, while Cole slept in the common area with other male travelers. Despite the propriety of the arrangement, rumors would certainly follow them back to Whisper Creek, but neither seemed concerned with such matters anymore. Judge Harmon proved to be exactly as Cole had described, a stern but fair man with no patience for land-grabbing schemes. He reviewed their evidence carefully, questioning them both about the events of recent days. This map alone would be enough to secure your water rights, Armstrong, he declared finally. With the added testimony about cattle rustling, I have grounds to issue an injunction against Hollister while the territorial marshal investigates further. Relief washed over them as they left the judge's chambers with official papers protecting Armstrong land from further encroachment. It won't end here, Cole cautioned as they started the journey home. Hollister has other means of making trouble. Cassidy squeezed his hand. Then we'll face that trouble together. They returned to find the ranch untouched, but tensions in the territory running high. Word had spread about Cole's legal victory, encouraging other small ranchers to stand against Hollister's expansion. Winter descended on Wyoming with characteristic ferocity. Heavy snows isolated the Armstrong ranch for days at a time, the outside world reduced to white emptiness beyond the windows. Yet inside was warmth, purpose, and growing certainty between Cole and Cassidy that what had begun as an arrangement of convenience had transformed into something neither had dared hope for. On Christmas Eve, Cole invited Cassidy to dinner in the main house. She arrived to find the table set with his mother's china, candles casting a golden glow over evergreen boughs adorning the mantelpiece. This is beautiful, she breathed, taking in the transformation of the usually practical space. Cole watched her from beside the fire, something vulnerable and determined in his gaze. I wanted to create something worthy of the occasion. What occasion is that? She asked softly, though her heart had begun a hopeful rhythm. He crossed to stand before her, taking her hands in his. The night I ask you to bear my name as well as my life. His voice was steady though his fingers trembled slightly against hers. I love you, Cassidy. I think I began falling the moment you stood on that dusty road and refused to be defeated by circumstance. Tears filled her eyes as joy bloomed in her chest. I love you too. When you said I would bear your life instead, I never imagined how completely that life would become my own. Cole knelt before her, producing a simple gold band with a small pearl at its center. This was my mother's. She made me promise I would only give it to a woman of courage and conviction, someone who could truly be a partner in all things. His eyes held hers. Will you marry me, Cassidy Jameson? Yes, she whispered, voice breaking with emotion. With all my heart, yes. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, Judge Harmon making a special trip from Cheyenne to perform the ceremony. The small church in Whisper Creek overflowed with well-wishers, neighboring ranchers, townspeople, and even some of Hollister's former allies who recognized the changing winds. Hollister himself had departed the territory after the territorial marshal's investigation uncovered evidence of fraud and intimidation that went far beyond water rights disputes. With his influence removed, Whisper Creek seemed poised for more honest governance. Spring brought new beginnings to the Armstrong Ranch. Cassidy planted a garden beside the main house, where she now lived as Cole's wife. The cabin where she'd first found independence became a schoolroom, where she taught the children of nearby ranches 3 days each week. Cole expanded his operation, bringing on additional hands and implementing modern methods Cassidy had read about in agricultural journals. Together, they built something neither could have created alone, a prosperous ranch run with intelligence and compassion. On their first anniversary, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Cole's arm curved protectively around Cassidy's waist, his hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their child grew. Did you ever imagine this? Cassidy asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. When you found me wandering toward Rattler's Bend that day? Cole smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. Not in detail, but I knew you were a woman who could make a life worth living, even in this unforgiving land. I was so lost then, she mused, convinced I had nothing left to give or receive. And now, Cassidy turned in his arms, framing his beloved face between her hands. Now I know that sometimes we find our greatest strength in bearing another's life alongside our own. Her eyes shone with certainty and love. They said I couldn't bear life, but they were wrong. With you, I can bear anything. As twilight deepened around them, Cole and Cassidy Armstrong remained on their porch, two souls who had found in each other not just survival, but a future richer than either had dared to dream.